Marcus Ashford's world stopped the moment the pregnant waitress walked down his wedding aisle and said she was carrying his baby. The bouquet hitting the floor sounded like a gunshot, and in that moment he had to choose between the lie he was about to marry and the truth he'd been running from for 6 months. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Some moments are designed to be perfect. The flowers arranged just so, the music timed to the second, the light filtering through stained glass windows in exactly the right way to make everything look like a painting. For Marcus Ashford, standing at the altar in his custom-tailored white tuxedo, this was supposed to be that moment, the culmination of 18 months of planning, the beginning of his future with Victoria Hastings, the woman his family had called his perfect match since the day they met at a charity polo match in the Hamptons. The cathedral was a masterpiece of old money elegance. St. Catherine's had hosted Ashford family weddings for 4 generations. The pews were filled with 400 guests, each one representing a connection that mattered in the intricate web of New York's social elite. Victoria's father sat in the front row, his expression one of satisfied approval. The merger, because that's what everyone secretly called it, was proceeding exactly as planned. Marcus felt the weight of his family's expectations pressing down on him like a physical force. His father, Sterling Ashford, sat ramrod straight 3 rows back, his gray eyes tracking every movement. His mother dabbed at tears that were more performance than emotion. His younger sister Emma gave him an encouraging smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. They all knew their roles in this theater of privilege. The processional music swelled. The flower girls scattered rose petals with practiced precision. Victoria appeared at the end of the long white runner, and Marcus had to admit she was breathtaking. Her dress was a custom Vera Wang creation that had been featured in 3 different wedding magazines before the actual ceremony. Her dark hair was pulled back in an elaborate updo that had required a team of stylists working for 4 hours that morning. She moved toward him with the grace of someone who had been trained since birth for moments exactly like this. But as Victoria glided down the aisle, her arm linked with her father's, Marcus felt something that terrified him more than anything else. Nothing. He felt absolutely nothing. No surge of love, no overwhelming emotion. Not even nervous excitement, just a hollow acknowledgement that this was happening, and he was allowing it to happen because this was what Ashfords did. They married well, they maintained the legacy, they played their parts. The irony was that 6 months ago he had felt everything. Every emotion he was supposed to feel now, he had felt then, in the most unlikely place imaginable, with the most impossible person. Her name was still a private mantra in his head, spoken only in the moments before sleep when his guard was down. Mia Reeves, a waitress from a diner he had stumbled into during a business trip to Chicago. A woman who had made him laugh in a way he hadn't laughed since childhood, who had looked at him and seen him. Not the Ashford name or the trust fund or the connections. He had tried to bury those 3 weeks they'd shared. He had succeeded, mostly except for the moments like now when the machinery of his carefully constructed life ground forward, and he wondered what would have happened if he had been brave enough to choose differently. But he hadn't been brave. He had done what was expected. He had returned to New York, proposed to Victoria with his grandmother's 10-carat ring, and begun the elaborate process of planning a wedding that was more corporate merger than celebration of love. The officiant, a silver-haired bishop who had known Marcus since he was christened in this very cathedral, smiled benevolently as Victoria reached the altar. Her father placed her hand in Marcus's with a gesture that felt more like a business transaction being finalized. Marcus caught the faint scent of Victoria's perfume, something French and expensive that smelled like old money and careful choices. The ceremony began. The bishop's voice rolled over the congregation with practiced authority, intoning the familiar words about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. Marcus heard himself responding at the appropriate moments, his voice steady even as his mind wandered to dangerous territories. He wondered if Mia had thought about him in these past months. He wondered if she had moved on, found someone who could offer her more than stolen moments and empty promises. He hoped she had. She deserved better than what he had given her. Victoria's hand in his was cool and perfectly manicured. She squeezed once, a gentle reminder to focus, and he squeezed back, playing his role. The bishop was talking about the sanctity of vows, about promises made before God and community. Marcus felt the words wash over him like water over stone, leaving no impression. The massive oak doors at the back of the cathedral stood closed, sealing them all inside this moment of carefully orchestrated perfection. The afternoon light continued to stream through the stained glass, painting everyone in jewel tone. The string quartet played softly, a romantic backdrop to romance Marcus couldn't quite feel. His best man Tristan stood beside him, holding the rings in a small velvet box, ready for the moment when symbols would be exchanged and commitments would be sealed. The bishop reached the traditional pause, the moment that appeared in every wedding ceremony. The moment that was usually nothing more than a formality. He smiled at the congregation and spoke the words that had been spoken at countless weddings before this one, words that no one ever expected to matter. If anyone here knows of any lawful reason why these two should not be married, speak now or forever hold your peace. The silence that followed was supposed to be brief and expected. A beat, maybe 2. before the ceremony continued its inevitable march toward conclusion. But this silence stretched. It stretched long enough that people began to shift in their seats, long enough that Marcus felt the first prickle of unease at the back of his neck, long enough that Victoria's grip on his hand tightened, and then the silence shattered. The cathedral doors, those massive oak barriers that should have remained closed, slammed open with a sound like thunder. The crash echoed through the sacred space, bouncing off stone walls and making 400 heads turn in perfect unison. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun streaming in from outside. Marcus's heart stopped. He knew her shape. He would know it anywhere, in any light, at any distance. The curve of her shoulders, the way she held herself, the determination in her stance. Mia, here, now, in this moment that was supposed to belong to his careful, controlled, acceptable future. She stepped into the cathedral and the light revealed her fully. She was wearing her waitress uniform, the black vest and white shirt from the diner where they had met, where he had fallen in love with her over coffee and late-night conversations about dreams neither of them thought they could achieve. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She had none of Victoria's polish, none of the glossy perfection that came from a lifetime of privilege and preparation. But her eyes, God, her eyes, they were filled with an emotion so raw, so desperate that Marcus felt it like a physical blow. Fear and determination and something else, something that made his carefully constructed world begin to crack at its foundation. Mia walked down the aisle, not ran, not stumbled, but walked with purpose, her footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. Every eye in the cathedral tracked her progress. Marcus could hear his mother's sharp intake of breath, could feel Victoria's hand trembling in his, could sense his father's rage building like a storm about to break. The bishop stammered, clearly unprepared for an actual response to his ceremonial question. "Young lady, this is highly irregular. This is a private ceremony. I must ask you to leave immediately." But Mia didn't stop. She didn't even look at the bishop. Her eyes were locked on Marcus, and in them he saw his past, his mistakes, and the future he had tried to bury. She reached the front of the cathedral, standing just feet from the altar, and when she spoke, her voice carried through the space with perfect clarity. "Sir," she said, and the formal address felt wrong in her mouth, a concession to the hundreds of witnesses watching this moment unfold. "Sir, I'm carrying your baby." The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just been dropped. Marcus felt Victoria's hand slip from his, as if his touch had suddenly become toxic. He heard the collective gasp of 400 people simultaneously. He saw his mother actually stand up, her hand pressed to her chest. He watched his father's face turn a dangerous shade of red, but none of that mattered. Nothing mattered except the truth he saw written across Mia's face. She wasn't lying. She wasn't seeking attention or money or revenge. She was telling him something she'd probably agonized over sharing. Something that had driven her to crash his wedding despite knowing exactly what kind of world she was walking into. Victoria took a step back from him and he heard the soft thud of her bouquet hitting the marble floor. The cascade of white roses and orchids scattered across the pristine surface, their perfection destroyed. She stared at him with eyes that showed not heartbreak but calculation, already thinking through the scandal, the headlines, the damage control. But Marcus couldn't look away from Mia, from the woman who had made him feel alive for the first time in his carefully curated life, from the mother of his child, a child he hadn't known existed until this moment, this impossible, terrible, perfect moment. The frozen tableau held for what felt like an eternity, the bishop stammered. The guests erupted in whispered conversation. Victoria's father stood up, his face apoplectic. Security guards began moving toward Mia from the sides of the cathedral, and Marcus Ashford, scion of one of New York's oldest families, made a choice that would destroy everything his life had been built to become. The security guards were closing in on Mia from both sides of the cathedral, their movements practiced and efficient. Marcus saw their approach in his peripheral vision, and something primal awakened in it. He took a step forward, off the raised platform of the altar, his hand instinctively reaching out toward her. "Stop," he commanded, and the authority in his voice, the voice that had been trained to command boardrooms and close billion-dollar deals, cut through the chaos. The guards hesitated. "Marcus," Victoria's voice came from behind him, sharp and cold. "What are you doing? Tell him to remove this woman immediately. Tell everyone this is insane. Tell him she's lying." But he couldn't, because he was doing the math in his head, counting back the weeks to those 3 nights in Chicago when he had convinced himself that what happened there could stay there, sealed away from his real life like it existed in a separate universe. 6 months. Mia would be showing by now if she was that far along. His eyes dropped to her midsection, and there it was, subtle but unmistakable beneath her uniform, the slight curve that he had somehow missed in his initial shock. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, meant only for her, even though 400 people were straining to hear every word. Mia's eyes never wavered from his. "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to walk into your fairy tale and blow it all up, but you wouldn't take my call. You blocked my number. You had your assistant send me a cease and desist letter when I tried to reach you through your office. What choice did you leave me?" The accusation hit him like a slap because it was true. All of it. 3 weeks after returning from Chicago, when Mia's calls had started coming through, he had panicked. He'd been engaged to Victoria for 2 weeks by then. His father had already announced it in the Times. The machinery of his predetermined future was in motion. emotion, and he had convinced himself that the cleanest thing, the kindest thing, would be to cut all ties. Let her move on, let him move on, pretend it had never happened. "Marcus, this is a circus," Victoria hissed, stepping down from the altar to stand beside him, though she kept several feet of distance between them. Her wedding dress rustled with indignation. "This woman is clearly disturbed. She's making wild accusations in front of everyone we know. Are you really going to dignify this with a conversation?" "She's not lying," Marcus said, and the words came out with the weight of absolute certainty. The cathedral erupted. His mother let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. His father stood rigidly in his pew, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Emma covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide. Victoria's father began making his way toward the altar, his intentions clearly violent. The bishop, thoroughly out of his depth, raised his hands in a futile gesture of peace. "Perhaps we should all take a moment to step into the vestry and discuss this privately. This is highly unusual, and we need to consider the sanctity of this space and the dignity of all involved." "There's nothing to discuss," Victoria said, her voice rising above the murmur of the crowd. She turned to Marcus, and for the first time since he had known her, he saw genuine emotion crack through her perfectly composed facade. It wasn't hurt. It wasn't even anger. It was humiliation. "You did this. You created this disaster, and now you're going to stand here and let some waitress destroy everything?" The dismissive way she said waitress, dripping with contempt, made something snap inside Marcus, because that was exactly how his world worked. People were valued by their pedigree, their connections, their usefulness to the dynasty. Mia wasn't any of those things, so she could be dismissed, threatened with legal action, erased like she had never existed, except she existed now, and she was carrying his child. "Don't talk about her like that," Marcus said quietly, dangerously. Victoria's eyes widened. "Whatever else is true, whatever happens next, you will not talk about her like that." "Unbelievable," Victoria breathed. "You're actually defending her in the middle of our wedding, in front of everyone." She began pulling at her ring finger, struggling with the engagement ring that suddenly felt like a shackle. "You know what, Marcus? You deserve each other. This whole pathetic mess is beneath me." She finally wrenched the ring off and threw it at his feet. The diamond caught the light streaming through the stained glass, sending fractured rainbows across the marble floor. Then she gathered her dress and swept down the aisle with all the dignity she could muster, her bridesmaids scrambling to follow in her wake. The cathedral doors slammed behind her, the second dramatic exit in less than 10 minutes. The silence that followed was different from before. This one was thick with judgment, anticipation, and the kind of scandalized excitement that only a true disaster could generate. Marcus could feel the weight of 400 gazes, 400 opinions forming, 400 versions of this story that would be told and retold in the coming days. His father's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Everyone out. This wedding is over." The bishop looked relieved. The guests began to move, slowly at first, then with increasing urgency, desperate to leave so they could immediately start making calls and sending texts about what they had just witnessed. Marcus barely noticed the exodus. He was focused entirely on Mia, who stood her ground despite looking like she might collapse at any moment. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her face, the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly at her sides. She had been brave to come here, braver than he had been about anything in his entire carefully managed life. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked when enough people had filed out that his voice wouldn't carry to the remaining stragglers. "I tried," she said, and he heard the bone-deep weariness in her voice. "For 3 months, Marcus. I called, I emailed, I even showed up at your office building, and your security wouldn't let me pass the lobby. That cease and desist letter made it pretty clear what you thought of me, what you wanted me to do." The letter. God. He remembered signing it, barely reading it, trusting his lawyer to handle what he had characterized as an inappropriate contact from a brief encounter. The legal language had been cold and threatening, designed to make any further communication seem criminal. He had effectively told her to disappear or face legal consequences. "I thought you wanted money," he admitted, the words shameful in his mouth. "I thought you were trying to leverage what happened into some kind of payoff." Mia laughed, a bitter sound without humor. "Of course you did, because that's what people like you think about people like me. We're all just looking for an angle, right? A way to get our hands on some of that Ashford fortune." She shook her head. "I don't want your money, Marcus. I want my child to know their father. I want them to have a choice about whether they have a relationship with you. That's it. That's the whole agenda." "Son," his father's voice came from directly behind him, and Marcus turned to find Sterling Ashford standing with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk about damage control. Your mother is hysterical. Victoria's father is threatening lawsuits. This situation needs to be managed immediately." "This situation," Marcus repeated slowly, "has a name, and she's standing right here." Sterling's gaze flicked to Mia with the kind of assessment usually reserved for business adversaries. "Miss Reeves, I presume. My people have been quite thorough in the past few hours. Born in Chicago, mother deceased, father unknown. You've worked at the same diner for 6 years. You have $17,000 in student loan debt and approximately $2,000 in your checking account. You rent a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that, frankly, I wouldn't send my security team into after dark." The casual invasion of privacy, delivered as if it were perfectly reasonable, made Marcus's blood boil. But Mia's face had gone pale and he understood immediately what was happening. His father had known. Even before the wedding, Sterling Ashford had known something was coming. He had investigated Mia, built a file on her, prepared for this exact scenario. How long have you known? Marcus demanded. Sterling smiled, and it was the smile of a man who always had the upper hand. Since this morning, one of Victoria's bridesmaids saw this young woman lurking near the cathedral earlier today and had the good sense to alert security. They took a photo, ran facial recognition, cross-referenced with your travel records from 6 months ago. Everything connected. I had hoped she would lose her nerve before making a scene, but here we are. So you knew and you let the wedding proceed anyway. Of course, because having her interrupt creates a narrative we can control much more effectively than if she had approached us privately. Now she's the unhinged woman who crashed a wedding. She's erratic, desperate, possibly mentally unstable. Any claim she makes can be dismissed as the fantasies of someone seeking attention. Marcus stared at his father, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in his life. This was strategy. This was business. This was the Ashford way. Control the narrative, protect the brand, eliminate threats with ruthless efficiency. It didn't matter if Mia was telling the truth. It didn't matter if his child was involved. All that mattered was maintaining the empire. No, Marcus said simply. Sterling's eyebrows rose. Excuse me? No, Marcus repeated, his voice gaining strength. We're not doing this your way. We're not spinning this into a story where she's the villain and I'm the victim. I'm taking responsibility for all of it, for Chicago, for running away, for the cease and desist, for everything. Don't be a fool, boy. Take her aside, arrange for a quiet paternity test, work out a financial settlement with an ironclad NDA. This doesn't have to destroy your life. Victoria can be convinced to reconsider if we handle this properly. Her family needs this merger as much as we do. But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. He was looking at Mia. Really looking at her, seeing past the uniform and the exhaustion to the woman who had shown him what it felt like to be genuinely happy. The woman who had driven to New York, who had walked into a cathedral full of hostile strangers, who had stood her ground against his family's money and power because their child deserved better. I'm sorry, he said to her, and he meant it more than he had ever meant anything, for all of it. You deserve better than what I gave you. Our child deserves better. And I want to try to be better if you'll let me. Mia studied his face for a long moment, searching for sincerity, for proof that this wasn't just another performance. Finally, she nodded just once. Okay, she said softly. Okay. The cathedral felt cavernous now that most of the guests had fled. The remaining stragglers included Marcus's immediate family, a few mortified wedding coordinators trying to figure out what to do with 400 place settings at the reception venue, and 2 security guards who looked deeply uncomfortable about the whole situation. The string quartet had long since packed up their instruments and disappeared, leaving behind only the echo of what was supposed to have been the most important day of Marcus Ashford's life. Sterling Ashford's face had progressed from red to an alarming shade of purple. If you think I'm going to stand here and watch you throw away your entire future for some summer fling and an alleged pregnancy, you are more deluded than I thought. It's not alleged, Marcus said, his jaw tight. And she has a name. Use it. The tension between father and son crackled like electricity. Emma, Marcus's sister, chose that moment to approach, her bridesmaid dress rustling as she looked between Marcus and Mia with an expression that was hard to read, somewhere between concern and curiosity. Hi, she said to Mia, her voice surprisingly gentle. I'm Emma, the sister who's about to watch her family implode, apparently. She held out her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Mia shook it. Nice to meet you, Mia said, though the absurdity of exchanging pleasantries and the wreckage of a wedding wasn't lost on either of them. You look like you're about to pass out, Emma observed, with the bluntness of someone who had nothing left to lose in terms of propriety. When's the last time you ate? Because crashing a wedding takes energy and you're eating for 2 now, right? Despite everything, Mia's lips twitched toward a smile. This morning, coffee and toast. Emma turned to Marcus. Your maybe baby mama needs food, and probably somewhere to sit that isn't a church pew surrounded by judgmental relatives and disappointed florists. Can we move this disaster somewhere less public? This disaster is my grandson, Sterling interjected icily, allegedly, and I will not have him discussed like some shameful secret to be hidden away. Marcus felt something shift inside him. Dad, you had a file on her compiled in a matter of hours. You were ready to destroy her reputation and discredit her claims before she even opened her mouth. Don't pretend this is about caring for a grandchild. This is about control. Like everything else in this family. His mother, Daphne, who had been quietly weeping in a front pew, finally found her voice. Marcus, darling, you're upset. We're all upset. But there's no need to be dramatic. Your father's only trying to protect you from making a terrible mistake. This woman could be lying. Women do these things for money all the time. Mia flinched as if she'd been struck. I don't want his money. I want my child to have a father. There's a difference. Is there? Daphne said, and her red-rimmed eyes were suddenly sharp. Because from where I'm standing, you've just ruined a wedding that costs more than most people make in 5 years. publicly humiliated my son and a lovely young woman who did nothing to deserve it, and thrown our entire family into the most horrific scandal we've faced in 3 generations, all to deliver news that could have been shared with a phone call or a letter. So forgive me if I question your motives. The attack was well crafted, designed to make Mia feel small and mercenary. Marcus saw her shoulders tighten, saw the way her hand instinctively moved to her stomach in a protective gesture that made his heart ache. Tried phone calls, Marcus said quietly but firmly. She tried letters. She tried showing up at my office. I had my lawyer threaten her with legal action if she contacted me again, so she did the only thing left. She came here and told me in person, in the one moment she knew I couldn't run away or have security escort her out. The admission hung in the air between them. His mother's expression flickered with something that might have been understanding, but it was quickly buried under layers of social conditioning and family loyalty. A paternity test, Sterling said, his voice like granite. Before anything else happens, before any more scenes or decisions, there will be a paternity test. That's non-negotiable. Fine, Mia said immediately, and Marcus saw relief flash across his father's face before she continued. As long as Marcus is the one who requests it. Not you, not your lawyers. Him. Because this is between us, not between me and your damage control team. Sterling looked like he wanted to argue, but Emma cut in before he could. She's right, this is Marcus's situation to handle. You can't fix this one, Dad. You can't buy it or intimidate it into submission. This is one of those messy human things that doesn't respond to corporate strategy. Watch your tone, young lady, Daphne warned. But there was no real heat in it. Emma had always been the rebel of the family, the one who said what others only thought, and right now Marcus was grateful for her presence. Marcus, Sterling tried one more time, his voice dropping to the tone he used when he wanted to appear reasonable. Think about what you're doing. Victoria comes from good stock. Her family's pedigree is impeccable. This woman, he gestured vaguely at Mia without looking at her, is nobody. She brings nothing to the table. No connections, no breeding, no advantages. Even if the child is yours, there are ways to handle this that don't involve destroying your future. The casual cruelty of it, the reduction of Mia to a liability column in a ledger, made Marcus's decision crystallize with perfect clarity. I'm leaving, he said. Mia needs food and rest. We need to talk. Actually talk. Without an audience. And I need some space from people who think of human beings as assets and liabilities. You walk out of this cathedral with her, Sterling said, and there will be consequences. Professional consequences. Do you understand me? Marcus met his father's eyes without flinching. I understand that you're threatening to cut me off from the family business because I'm choosing to acknowledge my own child. Yes, Dad, I understand perfectly. And I'm walking out anyway. He turned to Mia and offered his arm, an oddly formal gesture in the circumstances, but somehow fitting. She looked at it for a moment, then carefully placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. They walked down the aisle together, passing the scattered rose petals and the abandoned bouquet, moving toward the cathedral doors and whatever uncertain future waited beyond them. Emma hurried after them, her heels clicking on the marble. Wait. I'm coming too. Someone needs to make sure you two don't do something equally dramatic in the next hour. And I've already blown my chances of being a respectable Ashford daughter, so I might as well. The afternoon sunlight hit them as they emerged from the cathedral, momentarily blinding after the dim interior. A cluster of photographers who had been camped outside for wedding pictures immediately swarmed, their cameras clicking frantically. Marcus heard them shouting questions, saw Mia's face go pale with panic, and instinctively pulled her closer. No comment, he said firmly, steering them toward where his car was parked. Emma ran interference, using her bridesmaid bouquet as an impromptu shield and glaring at any photographer who got too close. They made it to Marcus's Tesla, a sleek black model that looked almost obscene, parked among the cathedral's Gothic architecture. He opened the passenger door for Mia, who slid in gratefully, and Emma dove into the back seat with the kind of ungraceful haste that would have horrified their mother. Where are we going? Emma asked as Marcus pulled out of the parking spot with more speed than was strictly necessary. Somewhere that's not here, Marcus said. Somewhere without family or photographers or people telling us what we should be doing. There's a diner 3 blocks from my apartment, Nia offered quietly. It's not fancy, but the food is good and nobody will bother us there. Marcus glanced at her, seeing the exhaustion etched in every line of her face. A diner sounds perfect. They drove in silence for a while, the city sliding past the windows in a blur of glass and steel. Marcus's mind was racing, trying to process everything that had happened in the last hour. This morning he had been preparing for his wedding, for the continuation of his predetermined life. Now he was driving through Manhattan with the woman he had tried to forget, and his rebel sister, heading toward a future he couldn't begin to map. Emma broke the silence from the back seat. So, not to be indelicate, but can we talk about the elephant in the car? How far along are you? 23 weeks, Mia said, her hand resting on the small curve of her belly. Almost 6 months. Emma did the math in her head. So this happened in Chicago? That business trip Dad sent you on to look at the Miller acquisition? Marcus nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. I had dinner at the diner where Mia worked. We started talking. I kept going back. 3 nights in a row, Mia added, and there was a ghost of warmth in her voice at the memory. He said he was a business consultant. Didn't mention the billion-dollar family business or the generations of New York royalty. In fairness, Emma said thoughtfully. Marcus has always been better at being a person when he's away from the family. It's like the Ashford name is this weight he can't shake here, but put him somewhere else and he's almost normal. I didn't lie about who I was, Marcus said defensively. I just didn't volunteer every detail of my background. You told me your name was Mark, Mia said quietly. Just Mark. And you implied you were traveling for work, not that you were evaluating whether to acquire a company and potentially eliminate jobs. Marcus felt the sting of that accusation because it was true. He had compartmentalized, allowed himself to be someone simpler for those 3 nights, someone who could fall in love without consequences. I'm sorry, he said again, the words feeling inadequate. I should have been honest about everything. Yeah, Mia agreed. You should have, but here we are, he echoed, pulling up to a modest diner with a faded sign that read Rosie's Kitchen. It was a world away from the cathedral, from the designer wedding and the champagne reception that would never happen. And yet, as he turned off the engine and looked at Mia's profile, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in months. He felt like himself. They went inside, the bell above the door chiming cheerfully. A waitress who looked to be in her 60s spotted Mia and immediately rushed over. Honey, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be home resting. Doctor's orders. I know, Rosie, Mia said with a tired smile, but I needed to take care of something important. Rosie looked at Marcus and Emma in their wedding attire, her expression shrewd. Does this have anything to do with that something important? Mia nodded. Rosie pursed her lips. Well then, you all look like you need feeding. Booth in the back, away from the windows. And I'm bringing you the full pregnancy special, Missy. No arguments. They slid into the worn vinyl booth, Emma on one side, Marcus and Mia on the other with careful space between. Rosie brought water and promised food soon, then left them in relative privacy. Okay, Emma said, folding her hands on the table like she was chairing a board meeting. Let's establish some ground rules for this conversation. 1. Everyone gets to speak without interruption. 2. No more lies or omissions. 3. We figure out a path forward that doesn't involve anyone else from our family for at least the next 24 hours. Agreed? Agreed, Marcus and Mia said in unison, then looked at each other in surprise. Good, Emma said with satisfaction. Then let's start with the obvious question. Marcus, what do you want? Marcus looked at Mia, really looked at her, seeing the woman he had tried to forget but never could. Seeing the evidence of their child growing inside her, seeing a future that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. I want to be a father, he said slowly, the words feeling both strange and right in his mouth. I want to know my child, and I want... He paused, gathering courage. I want to know if there's any chance we could try again, the right way this time. The question hung in the air between them, fragile and dangerous. Mia stared at him, her dark eyes unreadable, and Marcus felt his heart hammering in his chest with an intensity that rivaled the moment he had seen her standing in the cathedral doorway. Emma had the good sense to look down at her water glass, giving them the illusion of privacy in the crowded diner. Try again, Mia repeated slowly, as if testing the weight of the words. You mean the same Marcus who blocked my number and sent me legal threats wants to try again? The bitterness in her voice was deserved, but it still cut. I was a coward, Marcus admitted. I was engaged to Victoria before I even left Chicago. I knew what was expected of me, and I thought I could just compartmentalize you, keep you in a separate box labeled beautiful mistake, and move on with my predetermined life. How's that working out for you? Emma murmured into her water glass. Marcus ignored his sister. But I couldn't forget you, Mia. Every day for 6 months I thought about you. I wondered if you were okay, if you'd met someone else, if you ever thought about those 3 nights. And then today, when you walked into that cathedral, everything I'd been trying to bury came rushing back. The panic, yes, but also the feeling. The way you made me feel alive. Mia's expression softened slightly, but wariness remained. Pretty words, Marcus. But I need more than pretty words. I need to know you understand what you're asking. This isn't some romantic gesture where you ride in and save the damsel in distress. Not in distress. I was handling this. I have a plan. Tell me, Marcus said, leaning forward. Tell me your plan. Rosie arrived with 3 plates of food before Mia could answer. A towering turkey club sandwich with fries for Emma, a burger and onion rings for Marcus, and a plate piled high with meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and a side salad for Mia, plus a chocolate milkshake. You need your iron and your calcium, Rosie declared, setting down the milkshake with a decisive thunk. And before you argue, remember I raised 4 kids of my own. I know what pregnant ladies need. Thank you, Rosie, Mia said with genuine affection, and Marcus saw a glimpse of her life here, the community she'd built in his absence. Rosie gave Marcus and Emma a long, assessing look, clearly trying to decide if they were good news or bad news for her girl, then bustled away to tend to other customers. Your plan, Marcus prompted gently once they were alone again. Mia picked at her meatloaf, organizing her thoughts. I have savings. Not much, but enough for the first few months. I've been working double shifts when I can, saving every penny. My apartment is small, but the landlord said I can stay as long as rent is paid on time. There's a clinic 4 blocks away that works on a sliding scale for prenatal care. I've already interviewed 3 daycares for when I go back to work. My neighbor, Mrs. Chun, is a retired nurse, and she's offered to help during the day if I need it. She delivered this information with quiet pride, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest. She had been doing this alone, building a life for their child with limited resources and no support from him, and she had been succeeding. The guilt was almost overwhelming, and emotionally Emma asked softly, "Do you have people? Support? Mia hesitated, and Marcus saw the truth in that hesitation. My mom died 3 years ago. Cancer. I don't have other family, but I have friends. Co-workers. Rosie has been amazing. Not completely alone, but you are alone, Marcus said quietly. In all the ways that matter for this, you've been alone. I chose to keep the baby, Mia said, her voice firm. That was my choice, and I stand by it. I didn't need your permission or your approval, but you're right that I wanted you to know. Not for money, not for some fairy tale rescue, but because I thought you deserved the chance to be involved, and because our child deserves to know they weren't kept secret. Emma was watching this exchange with intense focus, her sandwich forgotten. Can I ask you something, Mia? What did you think would happen today? Best case scenario? Mia laughed, a sound without humor. Best case scenario was that Marcus would listen, that he'd agree to be part of the baby's life in some capacity. Maybe sign paperwork establishing paternity, agree to reasonable visitation. I wasn't expecting, she gestured at the surreal scene around all of this. And worst case, Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Worst case was that you'd have me arrested for disrupting the ceremony, that I'd be escorted out by police, possibly hurt, possibly causing harm to the baby from stress, that I'd have a record that would make it even harder to provide for my child, that I'd have tried my best and it wouldn't have been enough. A matter of fact, the way she delivered this worst case scenario, the acceptance that she might have been willing to risk arrest and injury just to tell him he was going to be a father, made Marcus feel physically ill. What kind of man had he become that a woman felt crashing a wedding was her only viable option? I'm so sorry, he said, and his voice cracked on the words. For all of it. For running, for hiding, for the legal threats, for making you feel like this was your only choice. You deserved better. You deserve better. Mia studied him for a long moment, then picked up her fork and took a bite of meatloaf. Actions matter more than apologies, she said finally. So let's talk about actions. You say you want to try again. Want to be involved. What does that actually look like, Marcus? Because in about 4 months, there's going to be a baby that needs practical things. Diapers and food and a safe place to sleep and health insurance and a college fund. Can you show up for those things when your father is threatening professional consequences? When your social circle is treating you like a pariah? When the novelty wears off and it's 3 a.m. and the baby won't stop crying? I don't know, Marcus admitted and saw Emma's eyebrows rise at his honesty. I don't have experience with any of this. I don't know how to be a father because my own father sees children as legacy assets to be managed. I don't know how to balance family expectations with what I actually want because I've spent my entire life being what they wanted me to be. But I want to learn. I want to try. Trying isn't enough, Mia said quietly. Our child needs more than trying. Emma cleared her throat. Can I offer an outside perspective? You're both operating from positions of fear right now. Mia, you're afraid Marcus will disappoint you again, or that his family will crush you. Marcus, you're afraid of failing at something you can't control or manage with money and influence. But fear isn't a great foundation for co-parenting. We're not going to be co-parenting, Mia said quickly. Marcus is getting married, or was getting married. I'm not asking for a relationship or pretending we're going to be some happy family. I'm asking for child support and visitation rights, legal stuff. The words stung more than Marcus expected. Is that really all you want? Mia set down her fork, her eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. What I want doesn't matter. What I want is impossible. I want those 3 nights in Chicago back when you were just Mark and I was just Mia, and we talked about dreams and fears and stupid hypothetical questions like what superpower we'd choose. I want the version of you who walked me home in the rain and kissed me for the first time under that broken streetlight. But that wasn't real, was it? That was you on vacation from your real life. And your real life includes trust funds and society weddings and families who run background checks on waitresses. It was real, Marcus insisted. Those nights were the most real thing I've experienced in years. Everything else, the name, the expectations, the predetermined path, that's the performance. That's the lie I've been living. Then prove it, Mia challenged. Prove that Mark and Marcus are the same person. Because right now all I see is another rich guy who got caught and is trying to spin his way out of consequence. The accusation hung between them and Marcus felt the truth of it like a knife. She was right to doubt him. He had given her no reason to trust anything he said. Words were easy. His world was built on words, on contracts and negotiations and promises that could be broken if the lawyers were good enough. Okay, he said slowly, an idea forming. You want proof? Come stay with me. Both Mia and Emma stared at him. Come again, Emma said. Your apartment, Marcus said, looking at Mia. It's small, you said so yourself. You're working double shifts, putting stress on yourself and the baby. Your clinic is 4 blocks away, which means you're walking everywhere in Chicago weather. Come to New York. Stay in my apartment. It's bigger than I need, plenty of room, and you can have your own space. No expectations, no strings. But you'll have access to the best prenatal care in the country. You won't have to work yourself into exhaustion, and I can be there. For appointments, for when you need something, for learning how to be what our child needs. That's insane, Mia said flatly. Can't just pack up my life and move to New York because you feel guilty. It's not about guilt, Marcus argued, though that was part of it. It's about being practical. You said actions matter more than apologies. This is an action. Let me help. Let me prove that I'm serious. And when your family finds out you're living with me, Emma interjected, when they show up with lawyers and demands and threats, what happens to Mia then? Then I deal with them, Marcus said firmly. I'm 29 years old. I have my own money separate from the family trusts. I can take care of this. Can you though? Mia asked, and the doubt in her voice was painful, because a few hours ago you were about to marry someone else, someone your family approved of, someone who fit into your world, and now you're offering me a place to stay and talking about standing up to them. But Marcus, people don't change that fast. Not really. The challenge in her words demanded an honest answer. You're right, Marcus said. People don't change that fast, but situations do. Priorities. This morning I was operating under the assumption that I could keep living the life that had been planned for me since birth. That assumption is gone. I can't go back to that version of my life because it doesn't exist anymore. So I have to figure out who I actually am when I'm not performing for my family, and I'd like to figure that out while being present for my child. Mia was quiet for a long moment, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. The baby kicked, a visible movement beneath her uniform, and Marcus found himself staring at that small miracle. His child, a real, actual human being who would be born in 4 months, who would need things from him that he didn't know how to give yet, but desperately wanted to learn. I need to think about it, Nia finally said. This is too big a decision to make in a diner while eating meatloaf and processing the most surreal day of my life. Fair enough, Marcus said, trying not to let his disappointment show. Take all the time you need. But, Mia continued, and Marcus felt a flicker of hope. You can come to my next appointment if you want. It's in 3 days. There's an ultrasound scheduled. You could see the baby, hear the heartbeat. Maybe that would help you understand what you're actually signing up for. I'd like that, Marcus said softly. Very much. Emma had been quietly observing this entire exchange, and now she smiled for the first time since leaving the cathedral. Okay, so we have a plan. Marcus attends the appointment. Mia thinks about the New York offer. And in the meantime, we all try not to make any more decisions that result in society scandal. Sound good? Sounds impossible, Mia said, but she was almost smiling. But I guess we can try. The 3 days between the diner conversation and the ultrasound appointment felt like 3 years. Marcus discovered that when you publicly implode your entire life in front of 400 witnesses, the aftermath comes in waves. The first wave hit approximately 6 hours after he left the cathedral, when his phone began buzzing with an intensity that suggested the entire social register of New York had simultaneously decided he needed their opinion on his life choices. He was in his apartment, a sprawling penthouse that suddenly felt absurdly large and empty. Emma had gone home to face their parents, armed with what she called her full rebellious daughter armor. Mia had returned to Chicago on an evening flight, insisting she had shifts to cover and a life to maintain regardless of the day's chaos. Marcus had offered to fly her first class. She had counter-offered with a basic economy ticket she purchased herself, and he had learned not to argue. Now he sat on his leather sofa worth more than most cars and watched his phone light up with incoming calls. Victoria's father, his mother, his father again, Robert, his cousin who had been a groomsman and was probably calling to either gloat or strategize, his business partner, his lawyer, 3 different board members from Pierce Holdings, 2 members of his country club, a journalist from the Times Society page. He ignored them all. Instead, he did something he hadn't done in years. He opened a bottle of whiskey, poured himself 2 fingers, and sat in the dark thinking about who he actually was when all the noise fell away. The second wave came the next morning in the form of a summons. Not a legal summons, though, given his father's mood that might be coming. This was a family summons, delivered via his mother in a text that read simply, breakfast meeting, 8 a.m., the club, not optional. Marcus arrived 15 minutes late, a small act of defiance that would have been unthinkable a week ago. His parents sat at their usual table in the private dining room of the New York Athletic Club, a bastion of old money where the waitstaff knew everyone's order and discretion was valued above all else. Sterling Ashford looked like he hadn't slept, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. Daphne had compensated for stress by becoming more polished, her hair and makeup flawless, her posture rigid. You're late, Sterling observed as Marcus sat down. Traffic, Marcus led. They all knew it was a lie. They all let it stand. A waiter appeared immediately, pouring coffee without asking. Marcus accepted the cup, grateful for something to do with his hands. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Daphne finally broke it. Victoria has agreed not to pursue legal action for emotional distress and public humiliation. Her father was quite insistent on suing, but we've managed to convince them that more publicity would be detrimental to everyone involved. How generous, Marcus said dryly. Don't be flippant, Sterling snapped. Do you have any idea what the last 24 hours have cost this family? The Pierce name is being dragged through every gossip column and social media platform in the city. The board is demanding explanation. 3 major investors have called emergency meetings. Victoria's family is threatening to pull their support from the museum expansion project. This isn't just about you, Marcus. Your selfish choices have consequences for everyone. Marcus took a sip of coffee, forcing himself to stay calm. I'm aware there are consequences. I'm prepared to face them. Are you prepared to step down from your position at Pierce Holdings? Sterling asked, and the question landed like a bomb, because that's what the board is requesting. Temporary leave while this situation is resolved. Resolved, Marcus repeated. You mean while you figure out how to spin this into something palatable for your investors? While we determine whether you're capable of making decisions in the company's best interest, Sterling corrected coldly. You've demonstrated remarkably poor judgment, son. You've allowed your personal life to compromise your professional reputation. That raises legitimate questions about your fitness for leadership. The threat was clear. Step in line or lose everything the family had spent generations building. It was the same threat Sterling had wielded over Marcus's entire life, the same leverage that had kept him obedient and compliant. But something had shifted. The prospect of losing his position, his title, his place in the family business, it still scared him, but it didn't control him anymore. I'll take the temporary leave, Marcus said, and watched his father's eyebrows rise in surprise. Sterling had expected a fight, but I wanted in writing that it's temporary and that my return isn't contingent on personal decisions about my relationship with Mia or my child. You're in no position to make demands, Sterling said. Actually, I am, Marcus countered. I hold 15% of Pierce Holdings in my own name, inherited from grandfather. You can sideline me from day-to-day operations, but you can't force me out entirely, and if you try, I'll make enough noise that every investor question you're worried about will multiply tenfold. It was the first time Marcus had ever threatened his father with anything, and the shock of it registered on both his parents' faces. Daphne set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. How dare you speak to your father that way, she said, her voice shaking. After everything we've done for you, every opportunity we've provided, every door we've opened, this is how you repay us? By threatening the family business over some waitress? Her name is Mia, Marcus said quietly, and she's carrying your grandchild. The least you can do is use her name. We don't know that for certain, Daphne insisted. There hasn't been a paternity test. For all we know, she's latched onto you as a meal ticket. Women do these things, Mark. They trap wealthy men with pregnancy claims. The cynicism, the immediate assumption of malice made Marcus realize how deeply his parents' worldview had poisoned his own. For 6 months, he had operated from that same assumption that Mia must want something, must be angling for money, because why else would someone from her background reach out to someone from his? I have an ultrasound appointment with her tomorrow, Marcus said. After that, we'll arrange for a paternity test if you need the legal documentation. But Dad, Mom, I'm asking you to trust me on this. She's not what you think. She's not trying to trap me or manipulate me. She's just trying to do right by our child. And what about Victoria? Daphne asked, tears welling in her eyes. That poor girl was humiliated in front of everyone. She loved you, Marcus. She was prepared to be your wife, to give you children, to build a life with you. And you threw it all away for what? Some romantic fantasy about a woman you barely know? Marcus thought about that, really thought about it. Had Victoria loved him? Had he loved her? They had been compatible, certainly. They shared the same background, the same expectations, the same understanding of what their marriage would represent. But love? The desperate, consuming, terrifying feeling he'd experienced during those 3 nights with Mia? No, he and Victoria had never had that. They'd had an arrangement dressed up in romantic language. Victoria and I would have been miserable together, Marcus said quietly. Maybe not immediately, maybe not obviously, but eventually we would have realized we were playing parts in a script someone else wrote. She deserves better than that. And so do I. You're a fool, Sterling said, standing abrupt. You're throwing away everything for a woman you spent 3 nights with and a child that may not even be yours. When this all falls apart, and it will fall apart, don't come crawling back expecting us to fix it. He walked out, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Daphne remained, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. She looked at Marcus with an expression that was part disappointment, part genuine grief. I don't understand you anymore, she said softly. The son I raised would never have done something like this. Maybe that's the problem, Mom, Marcus replied gently. The son you raised was never really me. He was who you needed me to be. Daphne stood, gathering her purse. When you're ready to be reasonable, we'll be here. But Marcus, understand this. If you continue down this path, there will be consequences that extend far beyond temporary leave from the company. You'll be choosing her over your entire family, over everything we've built, over your legacy. Maybe some legacies need to end, Marcus said. His mother left without another word, and Marcus sat alone in the private dining room, his breakfast untouched. He felt simultaneously lighter and more terrified than he'd ever been. He had just committed mutiny against the only life he'd ever known, and there was no going back. The third wave came that evening in the form of Emma, who showed up at his apartment with 2 suitcases and a determined expression. I'm staying here for a while, she announced, wheeling past him into the living space. Mom and Dad are unbearable, and someone needs to make sure you don't do something stupid like try to win Mia over with grand romantic gestures that completely miss the point. What's wrong with grand romantic gestures? Marcus asked, closing the door. Everything when the woman in question needs practical support, not flowers and poetry. Emma started unpacking one suitcase, which appeared to be full of baby books. I've been researching. Did you know there are approximately 8,000 decisions you need to make before a baby arrives? Car seats, cribs, bottle types, diaper brands, pediatricians, sleep training philosophy. It's overwhelming. You've been researching baby preparation, Marcus said slowly. Someone has to. You're walking into fatherhood with 0 preparation and a traumatized baby mama who has every reason not to trust you. The least I can do is help you not completely screw this up. She pulled out a book titled What to Expect When You're Expecting. and thrust it at him. Start reading tonight. You have an ultrasound tomorrow and you should at least be able to ask intelligent questions. Marcus took the book, oddly touched by his sister's support. Thank you, Em, for everything, for coming to the diner, for not judging me, for this. Emma shrugged, but her eyes were soft. You're my brother. You're finally doing something real, something that matters more than board meetings and trust funds. I'm not going to let you face it alone. Besides, she grinned, being the good daughter was boring. Being the rebel aunt sounds way more fun. That night, Marcus read the pregnancy book cover to cover. He learned about trimesters and fetal development and the changes Mia's body was going through. He learned about the importance of prenatal vitamins and the warning signs of complications. He read birth stories and advice on supporting your partner through labor. Each page made him more aware of how much Mia had been dealing with alone, how much courage it had taken to walk into that cathedral. By the time he finished, it was 3 a.m, and he had filled a notebook with questions and observations. He also had a growing sense of just how unprepared he was, how vast the gap between his life and Mia's really was, and how much work it would take to bridge it. But he was ready to try. Tomorrow he would see his child for the first time on an ultrasound screen. Tomorrow he would start proving to Mia that he wasn't just Mark on vacation from his real life. He was Marcus trying to figure out how to build a real life for the first time in 29 years. The clinic where Mia received her prenatal care was a 40-minute train ride from downtown Chicago, located in a neighborhood that made Marcus acutely aware of how different their worlds were. The buildings were older, some with windows covered by plywood or security bars. A group of teenagers hung out on a corner watching him with open curiosity as he checked the address on his phone. His suit, even though he'd deliberately chosen his most understated one, marked him as an outsider. Emma had offered to come, but Marcus had declined. This felt like something he needed to do alone, something too intimate and important to have a buffer present. Now standing outside the community health center with its chipped paint and security door, he wondered if he should have accepted her support. The waiting room was crowded. Mothers with toddlers clinging to their legs, pregnant women in various stages, a few nervous-looking men who Marcus assumed were partners or husbands. The chairs were mismatched, clearly donated. A television in the corner played a morning talk show with the sound on low. Signs covered the walls advertising WIC benefits, free parenting classes, domestic violence hotlines, and vaccination schedules. Marcus checked in at the reception desk with a woman who barely glanced at him, too focused on managing a phone that wouldn't stop ringing. He found an empty chair between a woman reading a parenting magazine and a man bouncing a fussy baby on his knee. This was Mia's world, he realized. This was where she had been coming for 6 months, alone, to make sure their baby was healthy. She arrived 10 minutes later, slightly out of breath. She was wearing jeans and a loose sweater that did nothing to hide her pregnancy now. In the fluorescent lighting of the clinic, surrounded by other pregnant women, the reality of it hit Marcus with renewed force. This wasn't abstract anymore. This wasn't a problem to be managed or a scandal to be controlled. This was his child growing inside the woman he had loved and abandoned. You came, Mia said, and there was surprise in her voice. Genuine surprise, as if she had expected him to back out. I said I would, Marcus replied, standing. He wanted to hug her, to touch her somehow, but the careful distance she maintained made it clear that wasn't welcome yet. They sat down together, the silence between them heavy with everything unsaid. The other man with the baby smiled at them. First ultrasound, he asked conversationally. For him, Mia said, nodding toward Marcus. I've had 3 already. You're in for a treat, the man said, grinning. Nothing prepares you for seeing them for the first time. Makes it real in a way nothing else can. Marcus felt a flutter of anxiety mixed with anticipation. What if seeing the baby made it too real? What if he looked at that screen and felt nothing, confirming his parents' fears that he wasn't capable of this kind of connection? What if he felt everything and it terrified him so much he ran again? Mia Reeves, a nurse, called from the doorway, clipboard in hand. They stood together and followed the nurse down a hallway lined with educational posters about breastfeeding and postpartum depression. The exam room was small but clean, with an ultrasound machine that looked like it had seen better days. The nurse was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and efficient movements. Good to see you back, Mia, she said warmly, then looked at Marcus. And you must be Dad. Nice to finally meet you. I'm Denise. Marcus shook her hand, noticing how Mia tensed at the word Dad. He's Marcus, Mia corrected quietly. He's here to see the ultrasound. Denise gave them both a look that suggested she'd seen every variation of complicated family situations and wasn't fazed by any of them. Well, Marcus, you picked a good appointment to attend. Baby has been growing right on schedule, and at 23 weeks we should get some nice clear images. Might even see if baby wants to show us what they are. If you want to know. Do we want to know? Marcus asked Mia, suddenly realizing this was a decision they should make together. Mia hesitated, then shrugged. I've been calling the baby they for 6 months. It might be nice to know for sure, but only if you want to. I want to, Marcus said. Whatever you want. Denise smiled and instructed Mia to lie back on the exam table and lift her sweater. Marcus watched as the nurse squirted clear gel onto Mia's exposed belly, seeing the full curve of it for the first time. That was his child in there. His child. The enormity of it made him feel dizzy. All right, let's see what we've got, Denise said, pressing the ultrasound wand to Mia's stomach. The screen flickered to life, showing abstract gray and black shapes that meant nothing to Marcus. Denise moved the wand slowly, her eyes trained on the monitor, occasionally clicking buttons to freeze images or take measurements. And then Marcus saw it. The shape resolved into something recognizable. A head, a body, tiny limbs moving in the fluid. A human being. impossibly small and perfect, floating in their own private universe. His breath caught in his throat. "There's your baby," Denise said softly, the professional detachment giving way to genuine warmth. "Looking good, strong heartbeat, right on target for size and development. See that flickering there? That's the heart beating away." The sound filled the room, a rapid, whooshing rhythm that was the most beautiful thing Marcus had ever heard. His child's heartbeat. Proof of life, of potential, of a future that was suddenly more important than anything he had ever prioritized before. "Oh my God," he breathed, unable to look away from the screen. "Mia, do you see this?" "I see it every time," she said softly, and he heard the emotion in her voice. "Never gets less amazing." Denise continued her examination, pointing out different features. "Here's a hand, see the fingers? And here's a foot. This looks like baby is practicing some kicks. Everything is developing beautifully. Would you like to know the sex?" Marcus looked at Mia, who nodded. "Yes," she said. "Please." Denise moved the wand, searching for the right angle. She was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "Looks like you're having a little girl. Congratulations." A girl. A daughter. Marcus felt something crack open inside his chest, some wall he hadn't known he'd built. He had a daughter. A tiny person who would depend on him, who would need him to be better than he had been, stronger than he had been, someone who deserved more than the hollow legacy of wealth and social position. He realized he was crying only when Mia handed him a tissue from the box Denise kept nearby. "Sorry," he said, wiping at his eyes. "I don't know what's wrong with me." "Nothing's wrong with you," Mia said gently. "It's overwhelming." Denise printed out several images, the grainy black and white photos that would be Marcus's first pictures of his daughter. She handed them to him with the same reverence she might use for something sacred, and in that moment they were. "Would you like a few minutes alone?" Denise asked, reading the room with practiced skill. "I need to update some files anyway." When they were alone, Marcus continued to stare at the ultrasound images, his daughter frozen in various poses. A profile shot showing her tiny nose and lips, one where she appeared to be waving, another where her hand was near her face. "She's real," he said, his voice rough. "I mean, I knew she was real, intellectually, but seeing her, hearing her heartbeat, it's different." "Welcome to parenthood," Mia said, sitting up and wiping the gel from her stomach, "where everything you thought you understood suddenly means nothing compared to this tiny person who doesn't even exist yet but already owns your entire heart." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the exhaustion, the strain, the fierce protective love that radiated from her. She'd been living with this overwhelming reality alone for months while he had been planning a wedding to someone else. "I'm so sorry," he said again, but the words felt insufficient. "For not being here, for every appointment you came to alone, for every time you felt scared or excited or overwhelmed and had no one to share it with. I'm sorry for all of it." Mia was quiet for a moment, her hand resting on her belly where their daughter was growing. "I need you to understand something, Marcus. I forgive you for Chicago. I forgive you for running, for blocking my calls, for the legal threats. I forgive all of that because I understand being scared. But going forward, our daughter needs you to be brave. Not perfect, not some fairy tale father, just present and brave. Can you be that?" The question hung between them, and Marcus knew this was the real test. Not the ultrasound, not the grand gestures or the pretty words, just a simple question about whether he could show up consistently for someone other than himself. "Yes," he said, meeting her eyes. "I can be that. I will be that." Mia searched his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, then let's figure out what comes next." Denise returned with paperwork and instructions for Mia's next appointment in 4 weeks. She handed Marcus some brochures about childbirth classes and father involvement. Marcus took them all, adding them to the ultrasound pictures he was clutching like lifelines. As they left the clinic together, stepping back into the cold Chicago afternoon, Marcus felt fundamentally changed. The man who had walked into that clinic was different from the one walking out. He had seen his daughter, he had heard her heartbeat, and he had made a promise to be brave, to be present, to be the father she deserved. Mia was quiet beside him as they walked toward the train station. Finally, she spoke. "About your offer to come to New York." Marcus's heart jumped, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Yes, I've been thinking about it, about what's best for her," Mia said, her hand on her belly. "Not for me, not for you, but for her. And the truth is, working double shifts while pregnant isn't sustainable. My savings are good, but not great. And the prenatal care here is fine, but it's stretched thin. They do their best with limited resources." "So what are you saying?" Marcus asked carefully. "I'm saying I'll come, temporarily, with conditions." Mia stopped walking and turned to face him. "I need my own space. Not your guest room, my own apartment that you're not paying for. I'll accept help with medical care and essentials for the baby, but I'm not moving into your penthouse and playing house. I need to maintain my independence." "Done," Marcus said immediately. "We'll find you an apartment, whatever you need. And I need you to respect that we're not together," Mia continued firmly. "We're co-parents. We're working toward being friends, maybe, but I'm not some prize you won by showing up to an ultrasound. The Marcus I fell for in Chicago, if he exists, has to prove he's real over time. Not with money or grand gestures, but with consistency and honesty." Marcus absorbed her conditions, understanding that each one represented a boundary she needed to feel safe. This wasn't about romance or redemption. This was about rebuilding trust from the ground up, brick by careful brick, with no guarantee of where the structure would ultimately lead. "I understand," he said. "Your own apartment, your independence, clear boundaries. I can work with that. I want to work with that. Mia nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulder. Okay, then I'll give my notice at the diner. I'll need 2 weeks to tie up loose ends here, say goodbye to people, pack up my life. Can you handle the logistics of finding a place? I can, Marcus confirmed, but I want you to approve it before we finalize anything. Send me your requirements, what you need in terms of space and location. This is your home, not something I'm imposing on you. A small smile touched Mia's lips. Look at you. Being reasonable. Maybe that book Emma made you read actually helped. Marcus laughed, the sound surprising him. You talked to Emma? She called me yesterday, warned me that you have good intentions and terrible execution, said I should give you a detailed list of expectations or you'd overwhelm me with expensive things I didn't ask for. That sounds like my sister, Marcus admitted. He's not wrong. They reached the train station and Marcus realized he didn't want to leave yet. Despite the cold and the crowds and the awkwardness still hovering between them, he wanted to stay in this moment where they were actually communicating, actually building something that resembled a partnership. Can I buy you lunch, he asked. Nothing fancy, just food. We should talk about practicalities. Insurance, pediatricians, what you'll need for the baby. Emma has been researching and apparently there are 8,000 decisions to make. Mia checked her phone, considering. I have to be at work in 3 hours. But yes, lunch sounds good. There's a Thai place 2 blocks from here that's cheap and amazing. They ended up in a small restaurant with mismatched chairs and faded photographs of Bangkok on the walls. The owner, a tiny woman who appeared to be in her 70s, lit up when she saw Mia and immediately launched into a rapid-fire conversation that resulted in Mia blushing and the owner beaming at Marcus with obvious approval. What did she say? Marcus asked once they were seated. That I finally brought my baby's father to meet her, Mia said, not quite meeting his eyes. He's been worried about me, about the baby. She thinks he looked like a good man who just needed to find his way home. The simple blessing from a stranger who had apparently been more present in Mia's pregnancy than he had been made Marcus's throat tight. I hope I can prove her right. They ordered food, and as they waited, Marcus pulled out his phone and opened a notes app. Okay, he said. Let's be practical. What do you need? Not want, but actually need in an apartment. Mia thought for a moment, then began listing requirements. Safe neighborhood, close to good hospital, ground floor or elevator access because carrying a baby upstairs will be hard. 2 bedrooms, 1 for me and 1 as a nursery. Natural light, she added, her voice softer. I need sunlight. My place in Chicago faces an alley and it's dark all the time. I want our daughter to wake up to light. Marcus typed quickly, noting everything. What about neighborhood preferences? Do you want to be near me or would you rather have more distance? The question made Mia pause. I don't know yet, she admitted. Close enough that you can be there quickly if something happens, but far enough that I don't feel like you're hovering. Is that too vague? Not at all, Marcus assured her. We'll find something that works. What about medical care? I want you to have access to the best prenatal care available, but I also want you to feel comfortable with whoever you're seeing. I'd like to meet the doctors first, Mia said, before committing to anyone. I've heard horror stories about fancy practices that treat patients like assembly lines. Denise at my clinic knows my name, asks about my life. I need that kind of care. Done, Marcus said. I'll set up consultations with 3 different practices. You pick the one that feels right. Their food arrived and they ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Marcus watched Mia methodically work through her pad thai, adding extra lime juice and seeming to savor every bite. She caught him staring and raised an eyebrow. What? Just thinking about how little I actually know about you, Marcus said. Your favorite food, what you do for fun, what you wanted to be when you were a kid. We spent 3 nights talking about everything and nothing, but somehow I missed all the basic details. Mia set down her fork. We were too busy talking about impossible things. Dreams we didn't think we could achieve, fears we didn't usually admit. The real stuff felt too mundane compared to all that honesty. Tell me now then, Marcus said. The mundane stuff. Start with something simple. Mia considered this. Okay. I wanted to be a veterinarian when I was a kid. I loved animals, used to rescue every stray cat and injured bird I found. My mom said our apartment was like a wildlife hospital, but vet school is expensive, and after she got sick, college stopped being an option. So I worked at the diner, saved money, thought maybe someday I'd take some classes. Then I got pregnant and all those someday plans shifted. What shifted them to? Marcus asked gently. To her, Mia said simply, her hand on her belly. To making sure she has options I didn't have. To being stable enough that she never has to choose between her dreams and financial security. To teaching her that she's worth more than whatever circumstances she's born into. The fierce determination in her voice made Marcus realize how completely he had underestimated her. She wasn't looking for rescue or a fairy tale. She was building a life for their daughter, with or without him, and his presence was a bonus she was willing to consider but didn't require. What about you? Mia asked. What did you want to be before you became Marcus Ashford of the Pierce Holdings Ashfords? The question caught him off guard. No one had ever asked him that. His entire identity had been predetermined before birth. Groomed through private schools and Ivy League education and carefully orchestrated internship. I don't think I was ever allowed to want anything different, he said slowly. My trajectory was decided at birth. Prep school, Harvard, join the family business, marry appropriately, produce heirs. Wanting something else wasn't presented as an option, but if it had been, Mia pressed. If you could have been anyone, done anything, what would you have chosen? Marcus thought back to the handful of moments in his life when he'd felt truly alive. Not performing, not meeting expectations, just being. Teaching his sister Emma to drive and her terrible jokes that made him laugh until his sides hurt. Volunteering at a youth center during college before his father pulled him out, saying it was beneath him. Those 3 nights with Mia when he could just be Mark, a guy in a diner talking to a woman who saw him instead of his last name. I think I would have been a teacher, he said, surprising himself with the answer. High school, maybe. Math or economics. Something practical, but also something that helps people build skills they need. I like explaining things, breaking down complex problems, and I like the idea of being part of someone's life during those years when they're figuring out who they want to be. You should do it, Mia said simply. After our daughter is born, after things settle, take some education class, become a teacher. Marcus laughed, but it was uncertain. My family would die of shame. At Ashford teaching public school? So let them die of shame, Mia said with a shrug. You've already ruined a wedding and gotten a waitress pregnant. Might as well go all the way and pursue an honorable profession that makes you happy. The casual way she said it, as if defying his entire family legacy was as simple as choosing a career path, made Marcus smile. You make it sound easy. It's not easy, Mia corrected. But you know what's harder? Living your whole life as someone else's idea of who you should be. Trust me, Marcus. I've spent 6 months preparing to be a single mother because I thought that was my only option. Easy isn't the goal. Authentic is. Their conversation continued through the meal, touching on everything from practical matters like health insurance and prenatal vitamins to deeper questions about parenting philosophies and hopes for their daughter. Marcus learned that Mia loved old movies and terrible reality TV in equal measure, that she'd learned to cook from YouTube videos, that she sang off-key in the shower and cried at dog rescue videos, that she was terrified of labor but more terrified of not being enough for their daughter. By the time they finished eating, Marcus felt like he was finally beginning to know the real Mia Reeves, not the fantasy version he'd carried in his head for 6 months. She was more complicated, more resilient, more interesting than the memory he'd tried to preserve. As they left the restaurant, Mia's phone buzzed. She checked it and her expression changed, becoming guarded. What is it? Marcus asked Rosie. She says there are photographers outside the diner asking about me. About us. She pulled up a news website on her phone and showed Marcus the headline, Ashford Heir's secret baby mama identified. Below it was a photo of Mia walking into her apartment building, clearly taken without her knowledge. Marcus felt rage burn through him. They're following you? Apparently, Mia said, her voice tight. The article has my name, where I work, where I live. There are quotes from people claiming to be my neighbors. One guy said I was always trouble, which is hilarious because I've maybe spoken to him twice in 6 years. This is my father's doing, Marcus said grimly. Or his publicist. They're trying to control the narrative by making you look like a gold digger before you can tell your side of the story. I don't have a side of the story, Mia said. I'm not interested in playing media games. I just want to be left alone. Then we move up the timeline, Marcus decided. Can you be packed and ready to leave in 3 days instead of 2 weeks? I'll handle your apartment lease, compensate the diner for lost notice, arrange movers. We get you out of Chicago before this gets worse. Mia looked uncertain. 3 days? Marcus, that's not enough time to ... It has to be, Marcus interrupted gently. They know where you live and where you work. They're going to make your life miserable. Photographers, reporters, people offering money for interviews. I've seen this before with other family scandals. It's brutal and intrusive, and you don't deserve it. Mia stared at the article on her phone, at the unauthorized photo of her just trying to live her life, and Marcus saw the moment she made the decision. Okay, she said, 3 days. But Marcus, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't let this turn into something it's not, Mia said, her eyes intense. I'm not moving to New York to be saved by you. I'm not the poor waitress who gets swept into luxury and lives happily ever after. I'm moving because it's safer for our daughter and because the medical care is better. Those are the only reasons. Don't turn this into some narrative about you being my hero. The words were a necessary reality check, and Marcus accepted them with a nod. I understand. This is practical, not romantic. You're making a strategic decision for our daughter's well-being. Exactly, Mia said, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. As long as we're clear on that. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of logistics and emotion. Marcus flew back to New York that evening and immediately enlisted Emma's help in finding Mia an apartment. They looked at 12 places in 2 days, ruling out anything that felt too sterile, too dark, or too obviously expensive. They finally found a 2-bedroom in Brooklyn, close to Prospect Park, with hardwood floors and windows that let in floods of morning light. The building had a doorman for security but wasn't ostentatious. The neighborhood was diverse, full of families and small businesses. It felt like a place where Mia could build a life, not a gilded cage. Emma stood in the empty apartment, sunlight streaming through the windows, and smiled. This is the one. It feels like a home, not a estate. Marcus agreed and signed the lease that afternoon. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Mia was dealing with her own challenges. The photographers had multiplied outside the diner. Rosie had taken to chasing them away with a broom, which only made them more persistent. Mia's neighbors, who had previously ignored her, were suddenly eager to talk to reporters. sharing invented stories about her lifestyle and habits. Someone claimed she had multiple men visiting at all hours. Another said she'd bragged about trapping a rich man. None of it was true, but truth seemed irrelevant in the face of a scandalous story. Mia called Marcus on the second night, her voice shaking. "I can't leave my apartment without someone shoving a camera in my face. They're asking me invasive questions about our relationship, about whether I'm after your money, about my sexual history. Marcus, they followed me to a prenatal appointment today. They were waiting outside the clinic." The protective rage that surged through Marcus was primal. "I'm sending security," he said immediately. "They'll escort you everywhere you need to go and keep the photographers at a distance. And I'm flying to Chicago tomorrow to help you pack. You shouldn't have to deal with this alone." For once, Mia didn't argue. "Okay," she said quietly. "Thank you." Marcus arrived in Chicago the next morning with a security team and a moving crew. The photographers swarmed when they saw him, shouting questions about the wedding, about Victoria, about his intentions toward Mia. He ignored them all, his jaw tight, and walked straight into Mia's building with 2 security guards flanking him. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor, a small one-bedroom that she'd been living in for 3 years. Marcus knocked, and when she opened the door, he saw the toll the last few days had taken. Dark circles under her eyes, stress written across her face, a fragility that made him want to destroy everyone who had contributed to it. "Hi," she said, stepping back to let him in. "It's not much." The apartment was indeed small, but it was clear that Mia had worked hard to make it a home. Books lined makeshift shelves. Plants crowded the windowsill, reaching toward what little light filtered through from the alley. Photographs covered one wall, mostly of her and an older woman Marcus assumed was her mother. The furniture was secondhand but carefully maintained. A small TV sat on a milk crate. The kitchen was barely larger than a closet. This is where she had been living while he'd been in his penthouse planning a wedding to someone else. The contrast was so stark it made him physically ache. "Where do you want to start?" he asked, forcing himself to focus on the task at hand. They spent the next hours sorting through Mia's possessions, deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to leave behind. Marcus learned more about her in those hours than in all their previous conversations. He learned that she kept every birthday card her mother had ever given her, that she had a collection of vintage teacups she'd found at thrift stores because they reminded her of her grandmother, that she'd been teaching herself Spanish through library books and practice videos, that she owned exactly 3 pairs of shoes and considered that sufficient. The movers arrived and began carefully packing boxes. Emma called to confirm that the Brooklyn apartment was ready, furniture delivered, utilities connected. Marcus's assistant had arranged for a car service to take them to the airport. Everything was moving according to plan, but Marcus could see Mia becoming quieter, more withdrawn as the reality of leaving set in. By evening, the apartment was nearly empty. Mia stood in the middle of the living room, looking at the bare walls and the indentations in the carpet where furniture had been. "This is the first place I lived after my mom died," she said softly. "I got it with my first real paycheck from the diner. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And now I'm leaving it for a city I've never lived in, for an apartment I haven't even seen, because staying here isn't safe anymore." The grief in her voice was palpable. "I'm sorry," Marcus said. "This isn't how any of this should have happened." "Nothing about this has happened the way it should have," Mia replied. "But I guess we work with what we have." Rosie came by as they were finishing up, bringing food she'd insisted Mia needed for the journey. She hugged Mia fiercely, whispering things Marcus couldn't hear, but that made Mia cry into the older woman's shoulder. When Rosie finally released her, she turned to Marcus with an expression that was pure protective mama bear. "You hurt my girl or that baby," she said, poking him in the chest with surprising force. "And I don't care how much money you have. I will find you and make you regret it. Understood?" "Understood," Marcus said, meaning it. Rosie softened slightly. "Good. Now take care of her. She's stronger than she looks, but she shouldn't have to be strong all the time. That's what partners are for." The word partners hung in the air as Rosie left, and Marcus caught Mia's expression. "That's not what we are," she said quickly. "Rosie doesn't understand the boundaries." "I know," Marcus agreed, "but maybe someday that could change if I prove myself. If you're willing to give me that chance." Mia didn't respond, just grabbed the last box and headed for the door. The flight to New York was tense. Mia sat by the window, watching Chicago disappear beneath clouds, her hand resting on her belly. Marcus wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease the enormity of what she was giving up, but everything that came to mind felt insufficient. Emma met them at the Brooklyn apartment with dinner and an enthusiasm that was both helpful and overwhelming. She'd arranged everything perfectly. The nursery had soft yellow walls and a crib with clean white bedding. Mia's bedroom had a comfortable bed and blackout curtain. The kitchen was stocked with basics. Fresh flowers sat on the small dining table. "I know it's not home yet," Emma said, watching Mia take in the space, "but we can make it home. Whatever you need, we'll get it. Whatever feels wrong, we'll change it." Mia walked through the room slowly, touching surfaces, looking out windows, testing the weight of doors. Finally, she turned to Emma with tears in her eyes. "It's perfect. Thank you." After Emma left, promising to come back the next day to help unpack, Marcus and Mia were alone in the new apartment. The silence felt different from before, weighted with possibility and uncertainty. "I should go," Marcus said. "Let you settle in, rest, but I'll be back tomorrow to help with whatever you need. And I'm just a phone call away if anything comes up tonight." "Wait," Mia said as he reached for the door. "Stay for a minute. I want to show you something." She pulled out her phone and opened her photos, scrolling to a video from the ultrasound. She'd asked Denise to record a few seconds, capturing their daughter moving, her tiny limbs pushing against the boundaries of her world. Marcus watched, mesmerized, as his daughter kicked and turned. So alive, so perfect. "This is why we're doing this," Mia said quietly. "All the complications, all the adjustments, all the uncertainty. This is who we're doing it." She handed him the phone. "Send it to yourself. When things get hard or confusing, when your family is pressuring you or you're questioning your choices, watch this. Remember her." Marcus sent himself the video, his hands shaking slightly. "Thank you," he said, "for showing me this, for letting me be part of this." "Don't thank me yet," Nia said with a tired smile. "You haven't experienced 3 a.m. feedings or diaper explosions or toddler tantrums. Ask me in 2 years if you're still grateful." "I will be," Marcus said with certainty. "In 2 years, in 20 years. I'm not going anywhere, Mia. I know you don't fully believe that yet, and I understand why, but I'm going to prove it to you. Not with grand gestures or expensive things, but by showing up every day, for every appointment and every milestone and every ordinary moment in between." Mia studied his face for a long moment. "Okay," she finally said. "We'll see." After Marcus left, Mia stood in her new apartment, surrounded by boxes and possibilities. She walked to the window and looked out at Brooklyn spreading before her, lights twinkling in the early evening. Somewhere out there, Marcus was returning to his penthouse, carrying the weight of promises he'd made and the challenge of keeping. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling her daughter move beneath her palm. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. "Whatever happens with him, you and I are going to be okay." But even as she said it, she felt something she'd been trying to suppress. Hope. Dangerous, fragile hope that maybe Marcus really could be the man he'd been in Chicago. That maybe they could build something together that wasn't a fairy tale but was real and lasting and good enough. The first month in New York passed in a blur of doctor's appointments, furniture assembly, and the delicate dance of two people learning to exist in each other's orbits without colliding. Marcus kept his promise. He showed up, not with extravagant gifts or romantic gestures, but with his presence, his time, his willingness to be uncomfortable and uncertain and still keep showing up anyway. He came to every prenatal appointment, sitting beside Mia in waiting rooms and asking the doctors questions he'd researched the night before. He learned the difference between Braxton Hicks contractions and real labor. He understood kick counts and fetal positioning and the warning signs that required immediate medical attention. The nurses at the practice began to recognize him, greeting him by name, commenting on how involved he was compared to most fathers. He helped Mia assemble the crib, a task that required 3 hours, 2 arguments about the incomprehensible instructions, and a final moment of triumph when they stood back and looked at the finished product. He accompanied her to prenatal yoga classes, the only man in a room full of pregnant women, attempting poses that made him realize how inflexible he'd become. He learned to cook the foods that helped with Mia's nausea and kept her kitchen stocked with a specific brand of ginger tea she'd discovered helped her stomach. But it wasn't all smooth progress. There were setbacks. Moments when the gulf between their worlds became impossible to ignore, like the evening Mia opened a package she thought contained the moderately priced stroller she'd carefully chosen, only to find a luxury model that cost more than she'd made in 3 months at the diner. Or the morning she discovered Marcus had paid off her student loans without asking, a gesture he thought was helpful but she experienced as a violation of her autonomy. "You can't just throw money at things," Mia had said, her voice shaking with anger. "I had a plan for those loans, a budget, a timeline. You don't get to come in and erase things without my permission just because you can afford to." "I was trying to help," Marcus had argued, defensive. "You were stressed about the payments. I thought I was making things easier. But you didn't ask me what would make things easier. You decided what I needed and did it without my input. That's not partnership, Marcus. That's control, dressed up as generosity." The argument had ended with both of them frustrated and Marcus sleeping on his couch in his own apartment that night. But the next day, he'd come back with an apology that showed he'd actually listened. "I opened a joint account," he'd said, "for expenses related to our daughter. You have equal access, equal say in how it's used. No more unilateral decisions. We discuss everything." It had been a turning point, the first time Marcus truly understood that Mia didn't need him to solve her problems. She needed him to respect her agency while offering support. The distinction was subtle but crucial. Emma became an unexpected bridge between them. She had moved into Marcus's guest room, claiming she needed space from their parents, but really serving as a buffer and mediator when tensions ran high. She taught Marcus how to have conversations without trying to manage outcomes. She showed Mia that not all Ashfords were emotionally stunted oligarchs. She organized childbirth classes and made them both attend, sitting between them during the birthing videos that made Marcus go pale and Mia laugh at his discomfort. The family pressure never entirely disappeared. Sterling Ashford made his presence known through terse emails and messages delivered through corporate channels. The paternity test results, when they came back, confirmed what Marcus had known in his heart: the baby was his. His father's response had been a single line: acknowledge. Expectations regarding discretion remain unchanged. Daphne tried a softer approach, showing up at Mia's apartment one afternoon with an elaborate gift basket and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I wanted to meet the woman who's giving me my first grandchild," she'd said, her gaze cataloging every detail of the modest space. Mia had been gracious but firm. accepting the gift while making it clear she wouldn't be absorbed into the Ashford family drama. "I appreciate you coming, Mrs. Ashford, but I want to be clear that I'm not interested in playing society games or pretending to be something I'm not. I'm having a baby with your son." That's the extent of our relationship. Daphne had left looking troubled, and Marcus had later received a phone call from his mother expressing concern about Mia's suitability, her lack of refinement, her unwillingness to understand their family's standards. He'd listened for about 30 seconds before interrupting. "Mom, I love you, but if you can't respect Mia and our choices, you're not going to be part of our daughter's life. It's that simple." The silence on the other end had been profound. No Ashford had ever drawn such a line before. The family consumed everything, demanded total loyalty, punished any deviation, but Marcus had discovered something stronger than family obligation. He discovered actual family, the kind built on choice and mutual respect rather than bloodlines and inheritance clauses. As Mia's pregnancy progressed into the 3rd trimester, their relationship shifted in ways neither had expected. They weren't lovers, weren't quite friends, but they were becoming something else. Partners in the truest sense. 2 people united by a shared purpose and growing trust. They developed routines. Saturday breakfast at the diner near her apartment, where the owner, an Egyptian man named Ahmed, had taken Mia under his wing. Evening walks through Prospect Park when the weather was good, Mia's pace slowing as her belly grew. Late night conversations when she couldn't sleep, her body too uncomfortable, talking about everything from names for their daughter to their fears about parenthood. "You're going to be a good father," Mia told him one night when she was particularly tired and her filter was down. "You cared too much to be anything else. That's the difference between you and your dad. He treats children like assets. You're already treating her like a person." The observation had stayed with Marcus, a touchstone he returned to when doubt crept in. He was rewriting the Ashford blueprint one decision at a time, and the woman who'd crashed his wedding was showing him how. They settled on a name together, a moment of collaboration that felt weighted with significance. Mia had suggested. It means illusion in Sanskrit, but also beloved in Hebrew. It felt right, a name that acknowledged both the unexpected nature of how they'd come together and the love they were building for their daughter. "Mia Ashford Reeves," Marcus had said, testing how it sounded. They'd agreed on the hyphenated last name after another long conversation about equity and identity. Giving her both names felt like acknowledging she belonged to both their worlds, not just his. "Perfect," Mia had agreed, her hand on her belly where Mia was practicing her kicks. The baby shower was Emma's project. A modest gathering in Mia's apartment with the women who had become her support system in New York. Ahmed's wife and daughters, 2 neighbors who'd welcomed her to the building, the doula they'd hired, and Emma orchestrating everything with military precision. Marcus had been banned from attending, but he'd helped set up beforehand and provided the food from a local restaurant Mia loved. It was small, nothing like the elaborate society events Marcus had attended his entire life. But watching through the photos Emma sent, seeing Mia laughing with women who genuinely cared about her, he realized this was what real community looked like. Not connections made through business or social advantage, but authentic relationships built on showing up for each other. As Mia entered her 36th week, Marcus found himself thinking constantly about the future. Not the vague, abstract future he'd been raised to manage, but the immediate, concrete future where he would hold his daughter, where he would be responsible for another human being's well-being, where his choices would shape someone else's life in profound ways. He was terrified. The terror was different from the fear he'd felt standing at the altar waiting to marry Victoria. That fear had been about living a lie. This fear was about being inadequate to the truth, about failing someone who deserved better, about repeating his father's mistakes in new and devastating ways. Mia seemed to sense his spiraling anxiety. They were in her apartment, Marcus assembling a changing table while Mia sorted through tiny clothes, when she spoke without looking up from the onesies in her hand. "You know what the secret is?" she said. "To being a good parent?" Marcus paused, screwdriver in hand. "What?" "Showing up even when you're scared, especially when you're scared. Kids don't need perfect parents. They need parents who are present, who apologize when they mess up and do better next time." "You're already doing that, Marcus. You've been doing it for weeks." "But what if I fail?" Marcus said, voicing the fear that kept him awake at night. "What if I turn into my father despite my best intentions? What if the damage is hereditary?" "And you course correct," Mia said simply. "You notice it, you acknowledge it, you change. That's the difference between you and him. He thinks he's right about everything. You're willing to admit when you're wrong. That alone makes you better than him." The conversation had left Marcus feeling simultaneously more terrified and more capable. Parenthood wasn't about having all the answers. It was about being willing to find them, to adapt, to put someone else's needs before your ego. The call came at 2:30 on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks before Mia's due date. Marcus was deep in a dream about teaching a class full of students who all had his daughter's face when his phone buzzed insistently. He grabbed it, heart already racing, and saw Mia's name on the screen. "Marcus," her voice was tight with pain and something else. "Fear. My water broke. The contraction started 20 minutes ago. They're getting closer together." He was out of bed before she finished speaking, pulling on clothes with shaking hands. "I'm on my way. Have you called the doula? She's meeting us at the hospital." "Marcus, I'm scared." The admission broke broke through his own panic. He forced his voice to steady, to become the calm she needed. I know, but we've prepared for this. We've practiced. We're ready. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Just breathe through the contractions like we learned. You've got this. He was in a cab within 3 minutes, calling Emma to tell her it was happening. She promised to meet them at the hospital. The drive to Brooklyn felt endless. Every red light a personal offense. Every delay unbearable. When he finally burst through Mia's apartment door, she was sitting on the couch, her overnight bag beside her, breathing through a contraction with her eyes closed. He waited until it passed, then knelt in front of her. Hi, he said softly. Ready to meet our daughter? Mia opened her eyes, and despite the pain and fear, she smiled. Ready as I'll ever be. Let's go have a baby. Labor was nothing like the videos they'd watched in childbirth class. It was raw, longer, more intense than Marcus could have imagined. They arrived at the hospital at 3 in the morning, and Maya didn't make her appearance until nearly 7 that evening. 16 hours of contractions, of Mia gripping his hand hard enough to leave bruises, of breathing exercises and ice chips, and the doula's calm guidance through waves of pain that made Marcus feel helpless and useless. He stayed by her side through all of it. When she was too exhausted to walk, he supported her weight during the laps the nurses insisted would help progress the labor. When the pain became unbearable and she screamed at him that this was all his fault and she hated it, he absorbed it without flinching, knowing she needed someone to direct her fury at. When she cried from exhaustion, convinced she couldn't do this anymore, he whispered encouragement even as his own fear threatened to consume him. Emma arrived around noon with coffee and snacks that Marcus couldn't. She took over for a while, letting him stretch his legs and splash water on his face in the bathroom. When he looked in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. Exhausted, terrified, covered in Mia's sweat from holding her through contractions. This version of Marcus Ashford would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. By late afternoon, Mia was fully dilated and the nurses called for the doctor. This is it, the doula said, her hand on Mia's shoulder. You're going to meet your baby soon. The final stage of labor was brutal and beautiful. Marcus positioned himself at Mia's head, supporting her shoulders, whispering encouragement as she pushed with everything she had left. The doctor and nurses worked efficiently, calling out instructions, monitoring the baby's heartbeat. And then, at 6:47 in the evening on a Tuesday in March, Maya Ashford-Reeves entered the world screaming her displeasure at the sudden cold and brightness. She's perfect, the doctor announced, placing the tiny, angry, beautiful creature on Mia's chest. Congratulations, you two. You have a healthy baby girl. Marcus stared at his daughter, unable to process what he was seeing. She was impossibly small, her face scrunched up in protest, her tiny fists waving. But she was real. She was here. She was his. Mia was crying, her hands cradling Maya with a tenderness that made Marcus's heart ache. Hi, baby, she whispered. Hi, sweet girl. We've been waiting for you. Marcus reached out with a shaking hand and touched Maya's tiny fingers. She immediately grasped his index finger, her grip surprisingly strong, and something fundamental shifted inside him. This was love. Not the abstract concept he'd agreed to when he proposed to Victoria. Not the passionate intensity of those 3 nights in Chicago. This was a love that would require everything from him and give him a purpose he'd never known he needed. Would you like to cut the cord, Dad? The nurse asked, offering him surgical scissors. He looked at Mia, who nodded her permission. With hands that trembled, Marcus cut the cord that had connected mother and daughter, symbolically separating them while somehow binding all 3 of them together forever. The next hours passed in a haze of checks and tests and paperwork. Maya scored perfectly on her APGAR tests. She weighed 6 pounds, 8 ounces. She had dark hair like Mia's and blue eyes that the nurses assured them would probably change color in the coming months. She was healthy and perfect and absolutely the most beautiful thing Marcus had ever seen. Emma was allowed in once Mia was settled in a recovery room, and she immediately burst into tears at the sight of her niece. Oh my God, she's gorgeous. She has your nose, Mia, and I think Marcus's chin. She's perfect. Can I hold her? They took turns holding Maya, passing her carefully between them, marveling at how someone so small could be so perfectly formed. Marcus held his daughter and felt the full weight of responsibility settle on his shoulder. This tiny person would depend on him for everything. Her safety, her happiness, her sense of worth in the world. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Mia fell asleep around midnight, exhausted beyond measure. Emma had gone home, promising to return in the morning. Marcus sat in the chair beside Mia's hospital bed, Maya sleeping in his arms, and allowed himself to fully absorb what had happened. He was a father. The man who had stood at an altar 6 months ago preparing to marry for convenience was now holding his daughter, the product of real love and authentic connection. His phone had been buzzing throughout the evening, notifications he'd ignored. Now in the quiet of the hospital room, he checked it. Messages from business associates, from distant relatives, from people he barely knew offering congratulations, and one from his father. I expect to meet my granddaughter at an appropriate time. We need to discuss her future and her place in the family legacy. Marcus stared at the message, feeling a surge of protective anger. His father still saw Maya as a legacy asset, a piece to be moved on the Ashford chessboard. But Marcus had a different vision for his daughter's future. One where she chose her own path, where she was valued for who she was rather than what she represented, where love wasn't conditional on compliance. He typed a response with one hand, careful not to disturb Maya. You can meet Maya when you're ready to respect her mother and understand that our family will look different from what you expected. Until then, we need space. I'm building something new here, and I won't let your expectations undermine it. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. Then he turned off his phone and focused entirely on his daughter. Mia woke around 3 in the morning to find Marcus still holding Maya, both of them asleep in the chair. She watched them for a long moment, father and daughter, and felt something shift in her chest. For months, she'd been guarding her heart, maintaining careful boundaries, refusing to hope for more than co-parenting. But seeing Marcus like this, utterly devoted, completely transformed from the man who'd tried to have her legally silenced, made those walls start to crumble. Marcus stirred, sensing her gaze. He opened his eyes and smiled, tired but radiant. "Hi," he whispered. "How are you feeling?" "Sore, exhausted, completely overwhelmed," Mia admitted, "and happier than I've been in a long time." Marcus carefully stood and brought Maya to Mia's bedside. The baby was starting to fuss, probably hungry. The nurse came in to help with the first feeding, and Marcus watched in awe as Mia cradled their daughter, as Maya instinctively knew what to do, as the most natural and ancient act in the world unfolded before him. After the nurse left and Maya had fallen asleep again, Marcus sat on the edge of Mia's bed. "I meant what I said at the diner," he began, "about wanting to try again, about proving I could be what you both. And I know I'm not there yet. I know I still have work. But Mia, watching you bring her into the world, seeing you be so brave and strong, holding our daughter and knowing she exists because of those 3 nights when we were honest with each other, I need you to know something." "What?" Mia asked softly, her heart hammering. "I love you. Not the memory of you, not the idea of you, but the real you. The woman who crashed my wedding and called me out of my cowardice. The woman who worked double shifts while pregnant because she refused to give up her independence. The woman who just spent 16 hours bringing our daughter into the world. I love you, and I want to build a life with you. Not because of Maya, though she's part of it, but because you make me want to be better than I was raised to be." Tears slipped down Mia's cheeks. "Marcus, I'm scared. I'm scared to trust this, to trust you, to believe this is real and not just emotion from an intense moment." "I know," Marcus said, taking her hand gently, "and I'm not asking you to trust me completely right now. I'm just asking you to let me keep proving it, day by day, choice by choice. Let me show you that Mark and Marcus are the same person, that the man you fell for in Chicago is the man I'm becoming in New York." Mia looked down at Maya, sleeping peacefully between them. This tiny person who had changed everything, who had forced them both to become more than they'd been. "Okay," she whispered. "But Marcus, if you hurt me again, if you disappoint her, there are no more chances. We're too important for that." "I know," Marcus said, "and I promise you, I will spend the rest of my life earning your trust, both of you." They sat in silence for a while, exhaustion and emotion making everything feel surreal and profound. Finally, Mia spoke again. "So what happens now, after we leave the hospital, after reality sets back in?" "Now," Marcus said, looking at his daughter, "we figure it out together. No more predetermined paths or family expectations or living someone else's version of who we should be. We build our own family on our own terms. And we teach Maya that love is about choice, not obligation." Mia smiled through her tears. "That sounds perfect." The first rays of morning light filtered through the hospital window, painting everything in soft gold. Marcus looked at Mia, exhausted and beautiful, holding their daughter. 6 months ago, he had been standing at an altar, about to commit to a life that would have destroyed him slowly. Today, he was sitting in a hospital room with the woman who had saved him by crashing his wedding, holding a baby who represented everything he never knew he wanted. Some moments change everything. A sentence spoken in a cathedral, a door thrown open, a choice made in defiance of every expectation. Marcus Ashford had lost his predetermined future, but in doing so, he had found something infinitely more valuable. He had found his real life, messy and uncertain and more beautiful than any carefully planned wedding could ever be. And as Maya stirred in her sleep, making the tiny sounds that would soon become familiar, Marcus made a silent promise. He would give his daughter the gift his family had never given him, the freedom to choose who she wanted to become, and he would give Mia what she deserved, a partner who showed up not just for the dramatic moments but for every ordinary day that followed. The phoenix didn't always rise from ashes of tragedy. Sometimes it rose from the ruins of a life that was never meant to be, transformed into something real and lasting.